Today, we will learn about the powerful and dramatic story of how America came to be. Welcome back to Mindset English, where we bring you inspiring and educational stories to help you improve your English listening and speaking skills. In today's special lesson, we begin an incredible journey through the history of the United States. This is not just a history lesson. It's a story filled with adventure, courage, struggle, and hope. By the end of this video, you'll understand how America started, what made it rise, and why it became one of the most influential nations in the world. Let's begin this exciting story. A long, long time ago, before there were cities, presidents, or even countries, the land we now call America was home to many Native American tribes. These were the first people to live here. Historians believe they arrived more than 15,000 years ago by crossing a land bridge that once connected Asia to North America. These early people were skilled hunters and gatherers. They lived close to nature, moving with the seasons, following animals, planting crops, and building homes that fit their surroundings. Their lives were rich with traditions, language, and spiritual beliefs. Every tribe was different. Some built large cities, others lived in small villages. They were the first Americans, even though the world didn't call them that yet. The story of modern America, however, begins much later. In the year 1492, an Italian explorer named Christopher Columbus set sail across the Atlantic Ocean. He was searching for a new route to Asia. Instead of reaching Asia, he arrived in the Caribbean. He didn't know it then, but he had landed on a continent that Europeans had not yet explored in full. His journey was supported by the King and Queen of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella. They gave him ships and money for the voyage. Columbus believed he had reached India, and so he called the native people he met Indians, a name that stuck for centuries. But Columbus wasn't truly the first European to arrive in the Americas. Almost 500 years earlier, Viking explorers, led by Leif Erikson, reached parts of what is now Canada. Still, Columbus's journey was the one that captured Europe's attention and started a wave of exploration and colonization. Soon, more European explorers followed. Spain, France, England, and others sent ships to claim land in the New World. Spain focused on South and Central America, seeking gold and riches. England and France turned their attention to North America, where they began building colonies. The arrival of Europeans changed everything. They brought new animals like horses and pigs, crops like wheat and sugar, and tools made of iron. But they also brought diseases that Native Americans had never encountered: smallpox, measles, and influenza. Tragically, these diseases killed millions of native people who had no immunity. Along with goods and technology, Europeans brought violence, war, and destruction. The peaceful life of many tribes was shattered. In 1607, the English built their first permanent settlement in America. It was called Jamestown, in what is now Virginia. Life there was incredibly hard. The settlers faced disease, hunger, and attacks from nearby tribes. Many didn't survive the first winter, but they refused to give up. With time, they learned to grow crops like tobacco, which became a valuable export. Other groups followed, hoping for a better life. In 1620, a group of English people called the Pilgrims sailed across the ocean on a ship named the Mayflower. They landed in what is now Massachusetts. They were escaping religious persecution and came to America to worship freely. With the help of Native Americans, they survived their first harsh winter and celebrated a feast of thanks together. This moment became the story behind Thanksgiving. By the early 1700s, America had become a land of opportunity. 13 English colonies stretched along the East Coast. People came from all over Europe, hoping to start new lives. The colonies were divided into 3 main regions. In the north, places like Massachusetts and Connecticut were full of forests and small farms. Communities there often worked together, sharing resources and building towns. In the middle colonies, such as New York and Pennsylvania, people from many cultures and religions lived side by side. These areas grew a lot of wheat and grain, so they were called the breadbasket of the colonies. In the South, colonies like Virginia and Georgia had large farms called plantations. These plantations grew crops like tobacco, rice, and cotton, and they became very wealthy, but this wealth came at a terrible price. Most of the labor on these southern plantations was done by enslaved Africans. They had been taken from their homelands, forced onto ships, and brought to America under brutal conditions. Once in America, they were sold like property, separated from their families, and made to work long hours in terrible conditions. They had no freedom, no rights, and no voice. Slavery became a central part of America's early economy, especially in the South. It was one of the darkest chapters in American history. Even though the colonies were in America, they were still controlled by Britain. The King of England, King George III, made the laws. The colonists had to pay high taxes to Britain even though they had no say in how those taxes were decided. This made many people angry. They began to say, "No taxation without representation." This meant they didn't want to pay taxes if they couldn't have a voice in the government. Tensions rose. In 1773, a group of colonists protested a tax on tea by sneaking onto British ships and throwing crates of tea into the water. This event became known as the Boston Tea Party. It was a bold act of rebellion. Soon after, in 1775, war broke out between the American colonies and Britain. This was the start of the American Revolutionary War. The colonists wanted to be free and make their own laws. They were led by brave leaders like George Washington, who became the commander of the colonial army. Another important figure was Thomas Jefferson. He wrote a powerful document called the Declaration of Independence. It was signed on July 4, 1776. This document said that the colonies were no longer part of Britain. It declared that all people have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It was a bold and dangerous move. The war was long and painful. The British Army was strong and well-trained. The American colonists were farmers, merchants, and regular people with little military experience. But they had something very powerful, the dream of freedom. They also received help from France, which sent ships, weapons, and soldiers. In 1781, the Americans won a major battle at Yorktown, Virginia. In 1783, Britain finally agreed to recognize the United States as an independent nation. The war was over. The dream of a free country had come true. After the war, America needed a plan for how to govern itself. The leaders of the new country wrote the Constitution. This document created the laws and rules for how the United States would work. In 1789, George Washington became the first president. The United States was now a free and independent country built on the ideas of democracy, liberty, and justice. But these ideas didn't apply to everyone. Enslaved people were still in chains. Women had no right to vote. Native Americans were being pushed off their lands. The dream of equality was still far from complete. The new country began to grow. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson made a deal with France called the Louisiana Purchase. It doubled the size of the United States. Americans began to explore this vast new land. Two men, Lewis and Clark, were sent on a journey to map the new territory. With the help of a Native American woman named Sacagawea, they traveled through rivers, forests, and mountains, learning about the land and the tribes who lived there. Many Americans believed it was their destiny to spread across the continent. This idea was called manifest destiny. Families packed their things and moved west, looking for new homes and new chances. But this expansion came at a cost. Native American tribes were forced to leave their homes and move to reservations. There were battles, broken promises, and deep suffering. The native way of life was destroyed in many places. At the same time, the economy in the South grew rapidly. Plantations made huge profits from crops like cotton, but slavery was still the foundation of this system. Millions of Africans were enslaved and forced to work in brutal conditions. The North, however, had a different way of life. Most people worked in factories or small farms and believed slavery was wrong. Tensions between the North and South grew. More and more people began speaking out against slavery. Brave men and women risked their lives to help enslaved people escape. One of the most famous was Harriet Tubman. She escaped slavery and then returned many times to lead others to freedom through a secret path called the Underground Railroad. Another important voice was Frederick Douglass, a former slave who became a powerful speaker and writer. His words opened the eyes of many Americans. Books also played a role in changing hearts. Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote a novel called Uncle, Tom's Cabin. It told the story of a kind and gentle slave and the cruelty he faced. The book shocked many people in the North and made them realize how evil slavery was. More and more people demanded change. By the 1860s, the argument over slavery reached a breaking point. The southern states wanted to keep slavery. The northern states wanted to stop it. In 1861, the southern states decided to leave the United States and form their own country called the Confederacy. This started the Civil War. As America grew into a land of promise and progress, millions of immigrants continued arriving in search of a better life. They passed through ports like Ellis Island in New York, where they underwent health checks and interviews before being welcomed into the country. For many, this was the beginning of their American dream, a vision of opportunity, freedom, and success through hard work. These newcomers worked long hours in factories, laid the tracks for new railroads, and helped build the cities that defined modern America. But life wasn't easy. Immigrants often faced prejudice, low wages, and crowded living conditions. Still, they held tightly to their belief in America's promise. They built communities, started businesses, and educated their children, hoping that the next generation would have a brighter future. Their determination laid the foundation for America's explosive growth during the 19th and early 20th centuries. Meanwhile, the U.S. government encouraged expansion westward by offering free land through the Homestead Act. Settlers moved west, building farms, small towns, and transportation networks that turned the vast wilderness into a thriving heartland. But this growth came at a devastating cost for Native American tribes. Their lands were taken, cultures were threatened, and many were forced onto reservations. The Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876, where leaders like Sitting Bull led resistance against U.S. forces, showed the deep commitment of Native people to protect their way of life. By the early 1900s, America had transformed into one of the world's largest and wealthiest nations. Its factories mass-produced goods sold around the globe, and its military strength began to shape international affairs. One turning point came in 1898 with the Spanish-American War. Supporting Cuba's fight for independence, the U.S. defeated Spain and gained territories such as Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. This marked America's emergence as a global power with influence far beyond its borders. While the nation grew wealthier, many American workers faced harsh conditions. Factory jobs were exhausting and dangerous, with long hours and low pay. Children were often forced to work instead of attending school. In response, workers began forming labor unions to demand change. They asked for fair wages, shorter workdays, and safer workplaces. Leaders like Eugene V. Debs became voices for workers' rights. Tragedy struck in 1911 with the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in New York City. More than 100 workers, most of them women, died because exits were locked and there were no fire escapes. This heartbreaking event led to major reforms in workplace safety and helped fuel the growing labor movement. African Americans, too, were fighting for progress. Leaders like Booker T. Washington promoted education and self-reliance as the path forward, while W.E.B. Du Bois demanded immediate civil rights and political equality. Though their methods differed, both men helped spark a movement that would grow stronger in the years to come. Then, in 1914, World War I erupted in Europe. At first, the United States remained neutral, But by 1917, it entered the war to support allies like Britain and France. American soldiers, known as doughboys, played a crucial role in ending the conflict. When the war ended in 1918, President Woodrow Wilson helped create the League of Nations, an early attempt to promote peace around the world. Though the U.S. chose not to join the League, Wilson's vision laid the groundwork for future global cooperation. The 1920s, known as the Roaring Twenties, were a time of rapid change and excitement. Jazz music filled the streets, and dance halls were packed. New technologies like cars, radios, and airplanes transformed everyday life. Women gained the right to vote with the 19th Amendment, and cities grew quickly as people moved from farms to urban centers. But not everyone shared in the prosperity. Many African Americans who had moved north during the Great Migration in search of better jobs still faced racism and discrimination. Despite this, they built vibrant communities and contributed to America's cultural and economic life. Just when it seemed like the good times would never end, disaster struck. In 1929, the stock market crashed, marking the beginning of the Great Depression, the worst economic crisis in American history. Businesses failed, banks collapsed, and millions of Americans lost their jobs. Families waited in bread lines for food and lived in makeshift homes. Hope was hard to find. In 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt took office and introduced the New Deal, a series of programs designed to rebuild the economy and restore confidence. The government created jobs by hiring people to build roads, schools, and parks. Social Security was introduced to help the elderly and disabled. Farmers and banks received support to prevent further collapse. Through his fireside chats, simple, warm radio messages, FDR reassured Americans that they could overcome this crisis together. But even as America struggled to recover, dark clouds gathered overseas. In Europe, Adolf Hitler rose to power in Germany and began invading neighboring countries. In Asia, Japan expanded its empire by attacking China and other regions. Though the U.S. initially stayed out of World War II, everything changed on December 7, 1941, when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, a U.S. naval base in Hawaii. The next day, America entered the war. On the home front, Americans united like never before. Factories shifted from making cars to building tanks and airplanes. Women, symbolized by Rosie the Riveter, took on jobs in industries left by men who had gone to war. In 1944, American and Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy on D-Day, turning the tide against Nazi Germany. In May 1945, Germany surrendered. Later that year, after the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan also surrendered, and World War II came to an end. The war left America stronger than ever. Its economy was booming and its military unmatched, but victory brought new challenges. The world was now divided between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. This led to the Cold War, a long period of tension, not through fighting but through political rivalry, space exploration, and military buildup. One key moment was the space race. In 1969, the U.S. made history when Neil Armstrong became the first human to walk on the moon. Another critical point came in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the world stood on the brink of nuclear war. The U.S. and USSR negotiated a peaceful resolution, avoiding catastrophe. At home, the civil rights movement was reshaping the country. African Americans had waited too long for justice. In 1954, the Supreme Court's decision in Brown v. Board of Education ended legal segregation in public schools. In 1955, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a segregated bus, sparking the Montgomery bus boycott. Inspired by leaders like Martin Luther King, Jr., millions marched, protested, and demanded equality. In 1963, the March on Washington brought over 250,000 people to the Capitol, where Dr. King delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. These efforts led to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed discrimination, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which protected voting rights for all citizens. As the decades passed, America faced new challenges. The Vietnam War divided the country, and economic troubles tested the nation's resilience. But there were also breakthroughs in science, technology, and civil rights. By the 1980s, America had become a global cultural and economic powerhouse. Into the modern era, America's strengths remain rooted in four powerful foundations. First, diversity. The U.S. is home to people from every part of the world. This mix of cultures, languages, and traditions creates innovation, creativity, and a deeper understanding of the world. Festivals like Thanksgiving, the 4th of July, and multicultural parades reflect the nation's unity in diversity. Second, economic leadership. American companies like Apple, Google, Amazon, and Tesla lead the world in technology, innovation, and business. Universities like Harvard, MIT, and Stanford attract students from around the globe. Third, military strength. With bases on nearly every continent and unmatched technology, America's military plays a major role in maintaining global peace and security. Fourth, cultural influence. American music, movies, and fashion are known and loved around the world. From Hollywood blockbusters to hip-hop and pop music, the U.S. shares its spirit with every nation. Still, America has important challenges to face. Racism, though reduced, has not been eliminated. Income inequality means some families thrive while others struggle. Healthcare is still too expensive for many. Political divisions create gridlock, and climate change threatens the environment. Yet America remains a land of problem solvers. Innovators work on clean energy, better health care, and advanced technologies like artificial intelligence and space travel. Young leaders advocate for equality, justice, and sustainability. Each challenge is an opportunity for progress. So, what makes America so inspiring? Freedom. The right to speak freely, worship openly, and chase dreams is the heart of American life. Resilience. Time and again, Americans have faced crisis with strength and unity. Innovation. From airplanes to smartphones, America keeps imagining the future. America is not perfect, but it is a nation built on dreams, powered by hard work and strengthened by diversity. Its story teaches us that no matter the obstacle, with courage and determination, progress is always possible. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through America's history. From its earliest days to the present moment, the United States continues to shape the world. If this story inspired you, please like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe to Mindset English for more stories that educate, motivate, and empower. Together, let's keep learning and dreaming big. The story of America and your story is just beginning.